here we are, end of the year, last one, the eve 2021, just around the corner. Just to kind of, as I marked the previous video, wanted to mark this one as well. Well, it wasn't originally my intention to, but just before I sat down to try and record this, I found this coat that I kind of like now. I'm pretty sure it may have used to be my mum's, but whatever. It's kind of dusty and covered in cat hair. I don't care. I don't even know if that's going to show up in the camera. Doesn't matter. I like it. This is the look that we're going for this as a final video of 2020. Hello and welcome to the Ragnarök Chronicles. My name is Dominic and this is a channel where I just take you through some of the lore of the books that I am writing over the rest of my life. I mentioned at the end of the previous video that we'll talk about today is going to be something which is important for the ongoing lore of this series, and it's something I'm pretty sure I haven't touched upon yet in the previous video, so I wanted to make this again last one of 2020, something notable. And now just to clarify and expand upon that, I'm still not going to be going into like every single little detail of everything that's going to happen, but more I want to kind of introduce to you a sense of this evolution, this progression that is happening in the background of a number of the books, and then will become the focus of one ultimately in turn. While the adventures of the respective stories, those that are related to Earth especially, are going to have kind of potentially glimpses of other stuff happening around the world as well, as I am doing in this first set of 4. Gift of the Mantis and the Ark of Angels available now on sale still, although only you're coming to the end of when they're on sale. You know, I have to do that. Even though they see other aspects potentially around the world as well, because if these are potentially world-ending scenarios, then unless it is really like secretive and confined, you're potentially going to see these ramifications everywhere. Everyone is going to be reacting. But even you have those cases, for the most part, the adventures still come down to whoever those characters are on their immediate adventure. You still have the world, and also outside of those adventures, though, you still have the world progressing on its own, still evolving on its own. I am in no way going to profess that I can predict how the world is going to change economically, technologically, and whatever in terms of reality, even though I am trying to have these books remain as grounded in reality as possible. So this is going to be one of the main ways in which they fall down in that regard, because once I start writing about the future, if we get to the point where we catch up with those years and people are still reading the books, hopefully they would be, they're going to notice, no, that's no longer the case. Anyway, the world is still progressing, and I'm going to have to come up with interpretations of how that works within the stories themselves, and this will be more conveyed in the background details of, again, these stories, at least in the ones that relate to Earth, just in terms of what technology they have, how people are talking to each other, kind of any of the social elements that are impacting on their lives at the time that may not be the focus, but still have underlying influences here and there on the way people behave. And one of the most important factors that is going to play into the progression of Earth after this first set of 4 books is this family, who I'm deciding I'm not going to give the name of just because, I don't know, spoiler reason, it's in the surname family of, but we're going to ultimately have this family of 3 generations, which with each generation, they are going to make specific strides and changes that, as I say, shape humanity's course. Usually, I try to avoid the whole thing of the lone genius solving everything, because in reality, you know, it's always, you know, you have the team of brains working at something. It's more of a collaborative effort in different departments and whatever. But in this case, yes, with each, again, member of this family in each generation, their mind is, in regards to the kind of situations and problems that they themselves are tackling, they seem to be naturally attuned to solving those problems. They are, while they still do have other people working around them, they are definitely the visionary mind that is driving and making the majority of the changes. The individual I'm going to be specifically talking about in this video is the second of those 3 generations, and her name is Jeannie. Born somewhere around the middle of the 21st century, she will grow up to eventually inherit the company and business and all that her father initially set up. And with this control and influence, she is able to, as I say, make even more strides towards ultimately, at least in her eyes, bettering the world, trying to make things easier for everyone, better for everyone, in ways that also, you know, reduce environmental impacts as well as reducing social issues and so forth. Again, not that all of those things can be done by one person, but she is definitely creating the mechanisms by which those changes then can start having their ripple effects and so forth. Although again, not to say, I don't want to say that any like big problem that people are genuinely suffering from in real life right now could be so easily just overturned. But again, how we're getting to this point in science fiction where we could start to get to those points, and also once I get to talking about those specifically, we'll also come across the fact that we are definitely also having that at a cost. But for that in a moment. To begin with, before she makes her biggest breakthrough, Jeannie initially, again, is trying to collaborate with other influential companies and, like, again, entrepreneurs and all that sort of her contemporary times, kind of as again a collaborative global effort to try to all work together rather than necessarily be in competition with one another. However, in certain cases where a company might refuse to help or they decline ultimately, there may be cases where she nevertheless therefore takes what ideas and designs she happened to glimpse from them to begin with, basically invent them under her own company and release them that way, still make profit off of the projects they in theory would have worked on together. And should that original company try to sue or something for copying of designs, she has the means by which to basically instantaneously wipe out the value of all of their stocks and the digital wealth, basically eliminating that opposition without a further thought. Obviously, there are going to be people who may start to suspect in conspiracies that she was involved given the circumstance, but those are situations that she will deal with later and there on the more personal level rather than on the business level. This is the sort of person that Jeannie is. If there is a problem, she will just try to eliminate it from the board entirely, rather than necessarily coming to some sort of compromise with them. She in turn is married to a man called Andy Smith, and it's with him that she would eventually have a child, but it's something that she puts off for as long as possible because that's not something she's really interested in, but eventually he persuades her. However, as throughout that, again, despite that being her relationship status, she is also in an external relationship with the daughter of a former president, this other woman being slightly older than she is, but that's really where her romantic interests are lying. To be clear, she is bisexual rather than she being lesbian and forced into a heterosexual marriage. So she's there, and as part of that, Andy doesn't really know that this sort of thing is going on the sidelines, but it is, and she even kind of toys with him in that regard, in that when it comes to naming the child that he eventually gets her to agree to having, she names the son Evan, which was the first name of that former president, who was the father of her girlfriend, in this case. Again, which he didn't necessarily make the connection to, but she's just trying to paint a picture of the kind of person that she is, the kind of personality she has. And as such, thinking of this person in power who, for whatever her inclinations of how to go about certain situations, be they business or personal, she is the one who then basically it falls into her lap the discovery about Beaureia energy, souls that we've talked about before as they exist in the alpha realm of this multiverse of the Ragnarök Chronicles. Per the events of another book that will have been released in between, because again the timeline of Jeannie's story, the book that will be Jeannie's story, kind of overlaps with other books. A silent satellite, part of the Nelosium, which again I've talked about before, crashes into the Mediterranean, completely derelict, as completely empty. And so she is the one in her vehicle, ship. She gets there first, and with her team, she gets to study it. And from this technology that was designed to basically create simulations for souls between lives and can funnel souls into them and pass them on into the next bodies, she basically makes that discovery of the existence of souls as an energy form. And through subsequent experiments, it can be kind of identified how at the moment of death, allowing for a buffering period as the Nelosium kind of processes it. That's how you can have someone resuscitated within a few minutes. But allowing for a buffering period, how the soul then leaves the body into the Nelosium or whatever. And from there, we can start to develop technologies that would harness that energy as it's leaving the body, rather than necessarily letting it go immediately off to the Nelosium. And once it's been harnessed, because it's energy, we can start to consider, can it be used for fuel? This is the train of thought that then sets her down to what is the greatest revolution of humanity's technology and society that pretty much is probably ever going to happen. Because right now, whereas previously we've been obviously right now having to deal with fossil fuels and trying to find renewable resources, if you now have the fuel being life itself, or I suppose more accurately death, then that is now seemingly infinitely more renewable and accessible. Of course, to even acknowledge the existence of souls in the first place in any kind of sense is going to start leading to greater debates on a religious front. And indeed, religion and faith is another one of these problems that she will try to deal with because she feels that it gets in the way, as obviously we'll explain in a moment, but it's probably pretty predictable. She feels it gets in the way of the work of making use of this energy source. But of course, faith isn't something that she can just eliminate like the stocks of a company. Not yet, anyway. But for all of this, for all of these complaints that if these really are souls, definitely shouldn't be using them in the technology that she is proposing, kind of over time, there's attrition with the public viewpoints. Like it starts by trying it out and using it on people on death row, for instance. People who would otherwise be executed anyway. The lowest viewed in society, as it were, the war criminals, the terrorists and all of that, using their souls to power. And once that starts getting slightly more acclimatized, you have certain people who might kind of like have organ donation. They would agree that once they pass away, they would have that soul energy taken and used. Now, of course, under the circumstances of that, the people with the right equipment would need to be at that person pretty much immediately at the moment of death. So it doesn't really work for emergencies. It would more if like they're coming to an end of life in some other circumstance, say in a hospital or wherever it is, the company of Jeannie's and that technical side would come to them. Because, as I've just said, we're basically making an economy of death. Yeah, Jeannie's people very much have to keep a tight hold on this technology. If they start allowing anyone to be able to do it, then you can imagine that could lead to some pretty terrible circumstances as other people try to gain wealth and power through essentially mass execution. Again, they don't want to have very tight control over who has access to technology when the technology is used, but over time it becomes more and more accepted, again, while she is still trying to deal with the matter of people who disapprove of it, both from either from a faith standpoint or just in any other standpoint. There is also kind of the propagandering that, you know, based on the experiments, once the fuel is expended in the machinery and the technology, also I'll say this first. Once it's used in the machinery, it still seems to dissipate out into the universe. So they would still say, well, it probably is still going on to whatever afterlife we're thinking of. If we're thinking of that, or reincarnation, we're just adding an extra step, we're not stopping that. As it happens, the actual science of using the soul energy in this way is actually having an effect, but they can't tell that at this stage. Either that or they don't care. Yeah, just as the point I was also going to make is that this energy is extremely efficient, the most efficient fuel that we've ever seen as humanity. And again, it doesn't have any pollutant byproducts because it's already like just harnessed from the byproduct is the dead body that was going to be there anyway. So you already have the energy harnessed. It's just a matter of then putting it into whatever other device you're going to use. And again, because it's very efficient, a lot of prolonged use in a number of places can be got out of just the Beaureia found from one person. So over time, eventually, decades down the line, it does become slightly more normalised and more normalised. Although you do nevertheless still have people who are objecting to it. At which point we start to lean more into the propaganda side of things, wherein those who don't approve of this use of technology in regards to souls are branded as the incarcerates, in that they are choosing to incarcerate their souls solely within their bodies, rather than allowing them to be free and used in grander purposes. Yes, it's not a perfect analogy because still the soul is passing on into the afterlife, supposedly, in their eyes afterwards, but it doesn't have to make sense entirely. It just has to brand them with a negative connotation, again, this group known as the incarcerates. They're not going to come across as lightly in the public, or at the very least in the media's eyes. And with those incarcerates further down the line, those among them that do end up leaning into this role of antagonists, or again being actively, radically against the general social order, as they start to fight back, and as they in turn start to get beneficial help from other bodies around the world that would also like to see trouble come to this family company that has become so powerful. They start to get help from them. That's an issue, but that's also more for when we get into Jeannie's son's, Evan's, timeline, when he ends up again inheriting the company in turn when he's old enough, and that's not necessarily what we're discussing today. At that point, though, we will have moved beyond experiments into possession, in turn in secret, gone into a time of dabbling with resurrection, and in turn be headed towards the darkest days of beastwood spirits. That, though, is far, far ahead of us. Right now, instead, we can just look forward to entering now 2021, a new year for us, wherein we can hope that things will indeed turn upwards for us at last overall. I hope that you all indeed do have a very good new year. We'll of course be continuing with the videos here, plus you still have the other old ones if you wish to go back to them or see them for the first time if indeed you haven't yet. But either way, just stick around, and until I see you again, the most important thing is just remember to keep on telling stories.